Hey there, and welcome back to my Factorio 1.0 tutorial Let's Play. I'm Xterminator, and thank you for joining me. And you all are probably pretty excited for this because we're going to cover a lot of things in regards to oil and oil processing and their products this episode. So we are almost where we left off last time. I've picked up some materials. I've crafted some chemical plants ahead of time just because they take a little bit to make here. And then I started running this pipe here to actually bring the crude oil over to ourselves. Last episode we ran power, however we did not run the oil. Now I could definitely have run the oil alongside the power poles, and perhaps that's something we will move later. I started running it here just because it's kind of already then in line for when we expand these oil refineries. The pipe is just all lined up how it needs to be. And I would have run this in its entirety off camera just because it's not the most entertaining thing, but I wanted to show you, just because I don't think I mentioned it specifically, that much like power poles and underground belts where you can hold left mouse button and just run and it will automatically place them at max distance, pipes work the same way, underground pipes. So right now all I'm doing is holding the left mouse button and running, in this case with my D key to run to the right, and it is automatically placing and connecting them at their max distance. Now, of course, like right here, if there's something in the way, it will skip it. So there is that. Now, if you do hold shift, though, well, if you hold shift like that, that won't work. But if you do come across a thing where you can't place it, you could hold shift here, and it will mark for deconstruction if you had robots. But, you know, we don't have robots yet. Not really applicable in this particular situation. We actually have a little bit of a thing here where we're going to have to go over the cliffs, which is no problem. Underground belts and underground pipes can do that fairly easily. So I think what we're going to do, I'm deciding if I would like to come off of this section or over to here. I think actually over here would potentially be better. This does create a nice little kind of almost pre-walled in area that we could easily defend. We could just stick some walls here or some turrets, and same with here and here, although here, okay, that does connect, I think. We'll have to look at that in actuality and see if that does connect, but over here may not even be necessary due to our base is going to encompass this, and this may not be connected, but this just makes this really easily defendable, actually. It's a really nice choke area. So as you can see, cliffs have a bit of an interesting hitbox here. Fun fact, cliffs are basically just reskinned walls, is how they've done this with different visuals. So this is why they have a hitbox like this. It's a little bit wonky, but you do get used to it, and it is, with the way Factorio is designed, it's pretty much the best way they could do it without introducing other problems. So we're gonna bring this up here, and I've actually brought this other pipe a little bit too far to the right here, I believe, or maybe just right. I think it's actually just right. So let's go ahead and connect this up here, and then one thing when you're running pipes, and I just mentioned this, it's pretty obvious, but it's easy to forget because I forget all the time, is when you run these underground pipes and then you need to make a turn, you turn a corner. If you don't do it, okay, so that's gonna die. That's okay. I mean, it's not okay, but we don't need to rush over there quite yet. Is when you make these turns, don't forget to connect up the actual turn here with an above ground pipe, either at the time of placing the initial turn or come back like I did. But it can be pretty easy at times to just completely forget to do that. So definitely keep that in mind. Everything here is connected. We're just double checking. We can pretty easily see simply by just making sure all the pump jacks are working. Now we may have a little issue here where some of these are trying to like push back in this way, but the pump jacks themselves do have kind of a built-in pump. I mean, it is in the name. It will generally pump it this way, but if we do see any issues, we could throw an actual pump somewhere in this line to kind of just force it all the way through this pipe. And of course, we are probably you're going to lose a little bit. That's fine. It's not that much. There's just one biter. I'm not quite sure how he managed to sneak in there in the first place. But as you can see, this is coming along here, and I've connected this up. However, we actually do want to throw a tank into the system here to store up this oil. This is just good so that, you know, you can store it up, and if you start running out, there will be a little reserve, or if a pipe gets destroyed, there will be some reserve here. I'm going to place it out here just so we don't have to pick it up, you know, right away and move it. In fact, ideally, this should actually probably be placed off of this section here, so it's just not in the way. And then this should actually come off, and this guy should actually connect up on here. So what we're trying to achieve here is basically just so it runs into the tank first. Now we are losing a fair bit. It looks like we have a little larger of an attack. You know, it's so this is another example of where I think not panicking is good. I could have just been like, oh no, you know, run over there and tried to fix everything, you know, get there, stopped what I was doing and go over there. And granted, we probably would have lost less stuff here. However, I would have then had to run all the way back over there and continue what I was doing. I would prefer to just finish what I was doing and lose a couple miners and belts, especially belts. Belts are very cheap, very inexpensive, very easy to replace. So that's why, you know, it seems like I didn't notice or I didn't care that my stuff was being destroyed. Now, if I was, of course, in my base, I would stop what I was doing and run over here and stop it. But being way over here, just running all the way back to save a few belts and miners, and then having to run all the way back again, is just not something I really want. So these guys, this is actually fine. This got destroyed because I was going the wrong direction anyway. But we do need to rebuild these miners, which is, again, not a big deal. There were only 4 of them. And there are far more expensive things we could have lost. So we're just going to place that there. I am going to craft a turret, and then we're going to start working on some oil subproducts, some refining. So last episode, we did start some very basic, you know, first steps of the refining, which gave us petroleum gas. And that is kind of the building block, if you will, for a lot of other things. Now, probably... This is actually fairly interesting. So here's a perfect example of what I was talking about an episode or 2 ago. You can see there our pollution's already spread out to here, but there's this square like within our border that's flashing. This is a very good indicator that there's most likely a base here, and that would be my guess as to where that attack came from. Now, why they targeted this opposed to something over here is probably just due to this being a higher pollution generator. The biters do... you know, prioritize the highest pollution generating structures as well as military structures, like radars and turrets. So probably why they went for that one instead of this stuff. This isn't, I mean, these all produce pollution, but miners produce a lot more than these things do, although there was a radar here. So it's a little bit interesting. Maybe it'll switch back and forth, but let's work on some oil. I'm going to keep a close eye. We really do need to go destroy that base, but I do want to hop into oil, as I know that's what a lot of you guys have been waiting for. So let's pick up some pipes here, some underground pipes. You do need a lot of pipes. It can be very easy to underestimate how many pipes you actually end up needing. Okay, so we have our petroleum gas, which is this recipe here, the basic oil processing. And we got that. We now have 12,000 of it. And this is giving us 45 of it every 5 seconds from 100 crude oil. This does have a crafting speed of 1 there, you can see on the right side, so it is in fact actually 45 every 5 seconds. It's not faster or slower because it's just base craft rate of 1. That's what the base craft rate is. That's what our player crafts with. So we have this. There's a few things we can do with this. First off, on the top left here, we can create sulfuric acid. However, you'll notice this actually requires something before we can do that, which is sulfur. And sulfur is actually something we're going to need for our next science, our blue science. So for the time being, I did want to show this to you. But for the time being, we're going to set sulfuric acid aside in regards to making it. We're not really going to worry about that right this minute, because we don't need this for a little bit. And, of course, we are being attacked again, so I probably just need to go kill that base. So I will explain this as we walk here. Yes, so I'm going to put this aside for a minute. It's not super complicated, but we just don't need it right now, and we want to focus on what we do need. And what we do need is sulfur, which is pretty straightforward. We take some water and equal parts petroleum, and we combine them into a chemical plant. All these will be made in a chemical plant. we combine these into a chemical plant, and then we get out some solid ingredients. So we've not really messed much with liquids yet, aside from just putting water into boilers. So this is where oil, gets a little bit interesting, because we're actually combining two liquid ingredients to then get solid ingredients out. Clear that up a little bit there so it doesn't get contaminated. Build this power pole. Let's go clear out that base. I'm pretty confident that's where that attack came from. And hopefully it's not too large. We may pick up a little ammo. Don't worry, we are going to get to oil this episode, I promise. I did not expect this heavy of an attack. They were not expanding in the last episode, but so we get this, and in it will tell you what it's made in. It's made in a chemical plant, so luckily there's no guesswork there. The other thing we're going to need is plastic. And while we do not need plastic directly for blue science, we do need it for advanced circuits, which are going to be a product in blue science. So it's actually kind of a step but before that. It's not a direct blue science ingredient, but it's an ingredient in an ingredient for blue science. If it gets a little complicated there, but that's why we do need plastic. And plastic actually combines now a liquid and a solid to then get a solid out. So petroleum and some coal, and then we get a plastic out too, in fact. So a lot of these things, so like these two in particular, this will give you 2. This will also give you 2, and then some of these liquids, this one will give you actually 50 sulfuric acid, you can see there at the top. So as I suspected, there's a base right here. Bit annoying. These guys are very upset. They were mounting some pretty serious attacks. I'm just clearing out this initial wave here. Just kind of push forward. Just let that do that. Now we could push even farther, but these have actually not entered our pollution. Over here, though, the little square down there looks like maybe there could be a base there. I should check it while I'm up here, just so we don't have another incident like we just had. And, okay, that's over there. It looks like maybe this is just typical. It could be because of these trees here, actually. So, and yeah, these are not quite in our pollution yet, so I think we do have some breathing room here to do some oil. So let's work on, we can just pick and choose one of these. We're going to work on sulfur first, because just in case for some reason we don't have time to get to plastic, we should, but if we don't, I want to cover sulfur because this is something that's actually going to require water. Where we haven't really introduced water in production recipes yet. So I've made an offshore pump, of course, because we will need water for this. And then petroleum, and we should get sulfur. So take these chemical plants, and you'll notice they have 2 inputs and 2 outputs, indicated by the blue arrows there. And the inputs will be defined once we select a recipe. So I'm going to place this, I want to pull off the tank. I don't want to pull from this pipe because obviously it's going to the tank, so we want to pull from our storage device here. And we're going to place this, the placing is not super important. I'm going to just place this like here, line it up, and then we go in here and we can select any of these that can be made in this. We're going to select sulfur. Now, a lot of times, so the inputs for sulfur and water don't change for this recipe, like they won't switch back and forth, but a lot of times you may just coincidentally end up where they're in the wrong place for what you want. This is a very common complaint that you can't switch them. So luckily this happened to line up, but there's a lot of cases where you may place this and have everything set up and then realize that like where you're running your water line is actually where it needs petroleum. And again, they don't like randomly change or anything. They will always be in these spots, but it just can happen sometimes where they're not where you want them to be. Selecting a different recipe, if it requires 2 liquids, it'll just be the same liquid in each one. You can input it wherever you'd like. But let's switch back to here. So let's do this. Now, so I mean, this is kind of an example where I'm actually going to be pulling water from kind of the left side here, and the water input's on the right side. Now, in this specific case, it's not really a problem because we have more than enough room to build. But you might imagine that in other cases, this could become a bit of an issue. And I'm actually going to run a little bit of a shorter pipe because I don't want to interfere with our hub here. And I'm going to just run this pipe downwards. Again, holding left click and walking. And there we go. Luckily we avoided those rocks. And we're going to place this right here. Yeah, we can do that. So this is going to pump all the liquid, all the water through here. And once we connect these corners up, we can then get sulfur. So it's pretty straightforward. Oil, in a general sense, is intimidating, and it's a pretty large kind of roadblock for a lot of people. It was for me for a very long time, and it's still, I will admit, it is still something I don't look forward to. It's still definitely a task for sure. It's it's not as mindless as like setting up red and green sciences for me. It definitely requires some thinking, but if you just take it one step at a time, you can do it. And very nice animations here, as we can see. But we are now spitting out sulfur at 2 every 1 second. These also have a crafting speed of 1. Fun fact, they actually used to have a crafting speed of 1.25, but to make everything consistent, the devs changed it to 1 to match these, which is quite nice. So we're just taking 30 of each. We're outputting these, and again, with this being a solid, you will need inserters to take this out. So this is where things can get a little bit confusing for some people, because in this, I remember having this experience when I first started playing, particularly with assembling machines, which I'll show you here in a short second. That when you're doing things that are both liquid and solid based, one way or the other, whether it be input or output, it can be kind of confusing. Like, well, okay, do I pipe this in? Do I export this? Like, once you realize, okay, this is a solid, then obviously you need an inserter. You can't, send a solid ingredient through a pipe and vice versa. But it may not be initially, intuitive that this is in fact a solid. I mean, sulfur, probably, yeah, it's going to be a solid, but it may not be. I don't know. It may not be 100% intuitive. So this is, if it doesn't show, a good indicator is everything will be marked. Okay, so you saw that these were marked. If it does not show any sort of liquid output, you know it's going to be a solid. To contrast that, this sulfuric acid does show a liquid output on here. Okay, so sulfuric acid, so it's an acid, obviously it's not really going to be a solid, but just for further, clarification of that, it is showing that these are actual liquid outputs. This one, however, did not. So that's a good indicator. And one thing I want to touch on, while it doesn't have to do directly with oil production, it does involve an oil subproduct. And I don't actually believe we have them unlocked. So we're going to just look a very little bit ahead, because I think this is important to show. Electric engines. So electric engines actually take lubricant. So there's something that are made in an assembling machine, but they actually require a liquid along with the solids. And this, when I first started playing the game, this tripped me up a lot, and I had to actually end up asking on the forums because I could not figure it out. And I think people still have some confusion with this. So in an assembling machine, the difference with assembling machines and chemical plants is chemical plants, even before you select a recipe, they have liquid inputs generally identified. You don't know what goes where, but this, like specifically, but this does show that liquid inputs are involved. An assembling machine, however, does not, and this is where it gets confusing. An assembling machine will only show you the liquid input once you select a recipe that requires a liquid, such as electric engines. So any other recipe we select that doesn't involve a liquid, you really would have no idea this could even accept a liquid, because there's absolutely no indication. However, when you do select electric engines, which you'll see once we unlock them, it will then identify an input, a liquid input. It'll look exactly like this with a little blue arrow, where you can input the lubricant. So just to clear up confusion there, it is a little bit more clear now than when I first started playing. Electric engines, they are made in assembler. It will tell you anything else. It will tell you what it's made in. And even though it may not look like it, you can select something that requires a liquid if it says it's made in an assembling machine. One other thing, which will be a lot more, easily identifiable when we actually select this, is you can easily rotate the output to any four sides, any of the 4 sides. It's only on one side, but you can just hit R once you select it with a liquid input, and it will rotate it around all 4 sides. In chemical plants, while you cannot rotate like just randomly on this side, you can rotate the whole chemical plant itself with the R key to, you know, change the orientation. Maybe you want things pointed differently. So just to point that out, that's that. Now we just output this, and we now have sulfur, which is one ingredient down, completed for our blue science. And if we wanted, we could, of course, put another one here if we wanted a full belt of this. That is not necessary at the current time. However, let's move on to plastic. So I'm going to leave a little bit of room here. And we're going to place down another chemical plant in plastic. And plastic is actually, I wouldn't say it's simpler. It's maybe a little simpler just because it only requires one liquid. And what I'm going to end up doing here is I'm actually going to pull this backwards slightly and do a little bit of rearrangement. So I'm going to pull off petroleum gas from here, because it will just kind of go this way. It won't be a perfect split, unfortunately, due to how liquids work. But with this small amount of production, this should work perfectly fine. And then we don't need to put it on both inputs. This can maybe be something else that's confusing. You certainly can, but it's not needed whatsoever. It won't like make it run faster. You know, if you have the liquid needed in the first place, you can just supply it to one. And then we do need to input a solid. So much like outputting, you then just use an inserter and input the solid as well as a liquid. And this is going to require some coal. So we're going to run this on up here. And I believe I put coal on my bus because we were doing some smelting. Luckily, it is very conveniently right here. And we're going to split that off and bring it on over this way. And this will come down. Go into here, and if we look, this needs one coal every 1 second. So a belt of coal can supply quite a few plastic machines, especially because we actually get the 2 plastic out. So for every 1 coal, we're getting 2 plastic. Now you do end up needing a lot of plastic, so it's you know, it's probably going, you know, you're going to have a draw on your coal for sure. And also, I'm actually going to rearrange this here very quickly because this the way I just built this is not super expandable. It's somewhat expandable, not as expandable as I would like. So with that in mind, here, I'm going to move this out a little bit. Let's line this up. I'm going to actually move this more out this way. And the reason I'm doing this is because I actually would like to put this on both sides. So we're actually going to curve our coal belt a little bit here, like this, because I want to have production of this on both sides. And the reason is just for expandability. If I had it just on one side, as I did, that's great. I can expand them upwards. But then when I output, you know, due to how inserters work with this mechanic of only putting stuff on one side of the belt, I'm only going to get half a belt of plastic, and then I would have to do some maybe weird balancing that doesn't really work too great to get it a full belt, even though it really wouldn't be a full belt because we're only getting half of one from the get-go. So we do this, and of course I could have left it as is and then just placed more over here, but it was a bit easier in my mind to route the coal just this way a little bit. So we're going to copy and paste these, and we're going to grab coal, and then we're going to output over here. Now we can easily turn these. In fact, probably as we expand this, because we will be expanding it this way, we can easily flip this and have this tie in here. And in fact, why don't we just do that now? It may seem like maybe I didn't have much of a plan going in because I'm rearranging this a lot. And honestly, unless you're using a blueprint, which is fine if you happen to have a blueprint or just find one somewhere online, unless you're using a blueprint, I personally find that just due to the nature of how oil works and how all the products work, it's very difficult to have an exact plan going in. You know, again, if you use a blueprint, you can just stamp it down. It will be the same every single time. However, I don't really use an oil blueprint. And my reasoning for that is, one, because my space in which I can build oil varies each game. Two, I don't use very many blueprints in general. And it's a bit of a side tangent as to why, so maybe I'll cover that in a minute. But in regards to the oil itself. A lot of times I don't have a solid plan going in because it's very hard, in my opinion, to plan exactly how your oil is going to be set up unless you're using a blueprint. And it will require some rearranging, and that is completely fine. That is, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So, even though I arranged this several times, whereas maybe with my science builds, assembly machine related builds, I didn't really rearrange them much. I got it mostly on the first go. I built these a lot more than oil just in general, and I think they're just a lot easier to set up. So if you need to rearrange, nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Heck, even if you need to rearrange after you've built everything and it's been running for a while, there's nothing wrong with that. I just do suggest, as with everything, make sure you leave yourself plenty of room. You'll notice I did leave a decent amount of room here. I don't plan to expand to the left, maybe like to here at the very most, because I want to leave room for this. I built this far away from my bus, partly because it puts it closer to the water and the oil, but also I don't want this encroaching right on my bus. So just make sure you leave room, and expansion should be no problem whatsoever. So we're going to now run these lines upwards, and we have, let me just double check our belt count here. So I'm not entirely sure what I had planned to go here. I suppose it could be plastic. I'm going to make this sulfur though. And the reason for that is because I'm very confident that I'm only going to need one line of sulfur for basically the entire game. However, like I said, plastic is something you're going to actually be making a fair amount of here. So I am going to plan, I may not end up needing it, but I'm going to plan for 2 lines of plastic. And obviously with this being here 3 lines already, we cannot put 2 more next to it because that would make a total of 5, meaning that our undergrounds would not reach plastic. So I'm going to start this on its whole new set of 4, again leaving a space of 2 in between as we have with everything. And that is basically the as far as we need to go with oil at this point. We could make sulfuric acid, but like I said, it's actually not needed whatsoever at this point. It will be needed a little later on, but not until after we've already made blue science. So I'm not going to bother setting it up and just letting it sit there when I would rather just progress directly towards our immediate goal, which is blue science, which we will start the research on now. And some railway, the ability to make trains, which is a whole other big part of the game, which we'll have to cover pretty in depth here, but we do at least want to unlock that. Stack inserters probably as well, which we'll go into once we get those. But yeah, so as far as what we need right now, this is it. And I hope that was a decent explanation. It maybe seemed like I didn't explain very much, but in reality, it's not as complicated as it may seem. Now, oil, again, is complicated, more so than most assembling machine related builds and recipes. And it is a big roadblock for a lot of people, and even for me, it's something that I do find a challenge every game. So hopefully that makes sense in regards to fluid inputs, solid inputs and outputs, how to identify them, how to route things. This is by far not the cleanest routing. There are far many better ways, technically, I guess, more aesthetically pleasing ways you could do this. I don't really worry about my oil being aesthetically pleasing, at least for a very long time in the game, because I would rather just have the products, and it takes, at least for me personally, it takes a long time to design an oil build that like works perfectly and looks fantastic. I can throw one together that works perfectly fine, but it may not look great, and I would just like the materials immediately, at least to begin with. Whereas with a lot of these builds, I can make them look fairly decent while still getting them down quickly. But liquids are a whole other animal here, and there will be a lot more explanation going into things once we get the advanced oil processing, which does give us those 2 additional outputs. But that is something that comes after blue science. We need blue science to unlock that. And so there's our oil. There's these are the 2 things. These are the 2 things you're gonna need to make your blue science, which is probably the reason you're making oil in the first place. I would imagine there was really no reason to make it before that. But of course you do need it for the sulfur and the plastic that then goes into these red circuits here. And the red circuits themselves are a little bit complicated. The build is a bit interesting how we work that, how I like to build it, how a lot of people build it. So we will be covering that next episode, I imagine, because that is our next direct go along with engine units, which are not too complicated. But I think to close out this episode, I want to quickly, as quickly as I can, discuss why I don't use blueprints, because I have this question come up a lot, and I think it's valuable for me to explain this to new players. Although, actually, one last thing to just quickly show you here before I go into discussion about that. I had some people in my main bus standalone tutorial episode ask about splitting things off from a middle section of the bus, opposed to, like, this would be considered the side of our bus, like the end of our bus right here. People asked about splitting things off from, like, the middle section of your bus, and it really just works exactly the same as doing it on any other part of your bus. So I'm just laying these out so it, like, as if we had a full bus here, and I mean we will need these here anyway, so it's not really a waste. You know, if you have like a section like this, for example, and you want to say pull something off of this gear belt, just hypothetically, if this gear belt were full, or this is a gear belt, right? I think so. Yeah. Or maybe it's a circuit belt. Pretty sure it's a gear belt. But whatever this belt may be, if we want to pull something off of this hypothetically, it's as simple as just undergrounding whatever is next to it where you would need to place your splitter. You do, of course, need to underground a section for your splitter. You can make it just 2, you can make it 4, whatever you know, see as fitting. And then you place a splitter just as you would, you know, on any of these split-offs. And then since we have left this 2 space here, which is something I made very clear on my tutorial for main bus, that standalone one, as well as when we built this, you then use this space here to underground through. So we can now just go like this, underground underneath, connect this up, and there's not going to be any lines in here, theoretically, because we've left this space blank. And there we go. Now it's split off from the middle-ish of the bus, crossed 2 sets of 4, and if we needed this right here, for example, we now have it. So that's, you know, and if there's more lines in the way, for, you know, if you're splitting off from the circuit one and this is in the way, you just stick another underground right here to put your splitter. Wherever you need to put your splitter or run lines, you can just underground that little bit. There's nothing wrong with that at all. It's pretty much a requirement to be able to do that. And there we go. So I'm going to pull this up, otherwise it's probably going to end up confusing me later. But really quickly, to end this episode, like I was going to say, the reason I don't use a lot of blueprints, or at least pre-made blueprints, I will sometimes, like fairly often, take blueprints that I've made in my current playthrough and then use them later in that playthrough. So like once I build a nice red circuit build, I'll probably blueprint that and then just use it to expand my current red circuit build in this playthrough. But the reason I don't come into playthroughs with like a whole hub blueprint, although I'm starting to actually do that just because I very much dislike building this part of a base. In my personal, you know, opinion, I don't like it. But the reason I don't come in with all these pre-designed science blueprints and oil blueprints, I know oil blueprints are pretty popular because it does make it easier. And if blueprints are your thing and you want to play that way, there's absolutely nothing wrong with them. They're in the game for a reason. They're a fantastic feature. I still use them to a degree, and there's nothing wrong with it. But the reason I don't come in with these pre-made blueprints is a couple reasons. I suppose a minor one, I should mention, just to be completely honest, is because I'm too lazy to make one. like that's a minor reason. That's a very small part of the reason, but to be completely transparent, I'm too lazy to make one, and I don't really like taking other people's blueprints as a personal preference. But the main reason I don't use blueprints like throughout playthroughs, like across multiple ones, coming in with a pre-made one, is because I like to challenge my creativity and challenge my brain and my thought processes and my building experience, and, you know, and all that, by making them on the spot. Does it take longer? Absolutely. Is it more difficult? Yes, for sure. And it, you know, is it as smooth as using a blueprint? Absolutely not. And that is a choice I make. And again, I'm not saying my way is right. I'm not saying your way is right or wrong. You know, you can play the game however you like, and I like to encourage that, whatever direction you may want to play. But I do get a lot of questions like that, and I think it is valuable for me to just express my thought process for why I don't use blueprints, you know, through like across playthroughs, these pre-made ones. because I like to challenge myself and do it differently every time. Now, differently is maybe subjective. Like, I mean, my red science is literally basically the same every time, but it's such a simple build. It's hard to not be different, or not. It's hard to not have it be the same. But for this stuff, like, this build is probably ever so slightly different than the one I did the last playthrough and 10 playthroughs before that, and I just like that in my personal playthroughs, and especially in my opinion, especially for tutorial series. I considered coming in like on my stream playthrough, which is a vanilla playthrough in 1.0. I did come in using a blueprint setup for a hub, but in a tutorial series, I will absolutely not do that. And the reason is because I do not personally. Again, if I know there are some other YouTubers who do tutorial series with blueprints, and that's completely fine. Some people really like that. If that's their style, like, for sure, I'm not criticizing them. But for my personal style, I personally don't think, at least for myself, that it's a good teaching mechanism to just have a pre-made blueprint. Like for oil, if I had a pre-made blueprint and I just put it down, I'm like, okay, well, here's your oil blueprint. It's shared, in the description. Just take it and build it. That's not, at least from my style, that's not a very good teaching mechanism, because I'm not showing you how to do it. I'm just giving you the end result, which works, and it will work if you place a blueprint, but you don't really know how we got to that point. And that's why, especially in tutorial playthroughs, like in this playthrough, I am not going to use any blueprints from external places, whether it be online sources or even my previous playthroughs. Now, we will use blueprints within this playthrough from things we've already built in this playthrough, just to expand on what we've already made. But I am not going to ever bring in blueprints that are from outside this playthrough, because I want to walk you through, how everything goes in my thought process. And if there's rearrangement that needs to be done, or there's mistakes that are made, it may be kind of hard to watch at some points, but I think it's a good learning experience, because if you're a new player, maybe just you seeing me mess up and the fact that you realize it's a mistake, I would say is a learning experience in and of itself. And then, if I come back and correct it, I can show you how I correct it. So maybe you know how to correct mistakes you run into and how to be creative with your build. So there we go. That's it, guys. That's just my little explanation as to why, I'm not bringing in blueprints, why just in general I don't use blueprints very much. I think it's a fantastic feature. Anyone who uses them, I think, is completely welcome to use them, and I have like no criticism for them whatsoever. But for me personally, that is just my reasoning. So there we go. That is oil. There wasn't much to it, but that's really all we need right now. We can just start working on blue science next episode. But if you do have questions with this, if there's something I forgot to cover, or maybe I somehow unfortunately made more complicated, I hope that's not the case. But anything in regards to what we covered here, do please leave down in the comments, and myself or other people will be glad to answer. And of course, we will cover the next steps, sulfuric acid and anything else that comes along as we get there. But I didn't want to jump ahead of ourselves. So there we go. And I hope as a whole you found this helpful and such. And if you did, a like is much appreciated, so other people can find the video and content and hopefully find it helpful as well. If you're new to the game, I hope you're having a great time, and welcome. And if you're new to the channel, welcome as well. And feel free to subscribe to keep up with all the content that's going to be coming out here with 1.0 Factorio. There's going to be a lot of it. I'm very excited. So leave your thoughts and feedback below. As always, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, I look forward to seeing you all, and do take care.